Hello everyone and welcome to Sleepy Classes. Before moving on to this video, here is a little thing that we wanted to inform you about. अब Sleepy Classes continuously present करता आ रहा है और बनाता आ रहा है a number of toppers जिनके लिए हमने genuine contribution की है to preparing them with content, answer writing, developing their personality, etc. And इसी को और आगे लेके जाने के लिए हमने कोर्सेज डिवाइस किए हैं जो कि आपकी एंड टू एंड प्रिपरेशन को हासिल कर पाएं। एंड इसी के चलते हुए अगर आप पॉलिटिकल साइंस एंड इंटरनेशनल रिलेशंस ऑप्शनल को प्रिपेयर कर रहे हैं तो आप हमारा बैच 4 ज्वाइन कर सकते हैं फॉर यूपीएससी 2024, जहां पे आपको ऑप्शन मिलता है ऑफ टैकलिंग दिस ऑप्शनल अलोंग विद कंटेंट, मंथली करंट अफेयर्स, आंसर राइटिंग एज वेल एज अ टेलीग्राम सपोर्ट ग्रुप एंड मेंटरशिप की अपॉर्चुनिटी भी। Now, importantly, depending on your requirements, आप ज्वाइन कर सकते हैं कोर्स को कि अगर आपको इवैल्यूएट करवाने हैं आंसर्स या नहीं, जिसके लिए आपके पास विदाउट इवैल्यूएशन का कोर्स जो है अवेलेबल है। देन इंपॉर्टेंटली अगर आप चाहते हैं आपके आंसर्स भी चेक हो ताकि आप इम्प्रूव कर पाए अपने आंसर राइटिंग में और भी ज़्यादा, तो आप विद आंसर इवैल्यूएशन का कोर्स जो है ज्वाइन कर सकते हैं। Then importantly, अगर apart from evaluation, you also want कि selected officers mentor करें, आपके साथ strategize करें, तो आप PSIR का mentorship group जो है उसका भी पार्ट बन सकते हैं और strengthen कर सकते हैं अपने 2024 या 2025 की PSIR optional की preparation। अब अगर आप appear हो रहे हैं for means 2023, ज़रूरी है कि आप अपने टाइम को बहुत ही बेहतरीन तरीके से यूटिलाइज करें। एंड दैट इज़ वाई अनदर ईयर हम लेके आए हैं हमारा वास्टली सक्सेसफुल पॉलिटिकल साइंस एंड इंटरनेशनल रिलेशंस स्पेशल प्रायोरिटी ग्रुप, जो कि कंबाइन करता है हमारे लाइव क्रैश कोर्स को अलोंग विद द टेस्ट सीरीज, ताकि आप लेवल अप कर सके अपने PSIR ऑप्शनल की प्रिपरेशन में एंड मैक्सिमाइज कर सके अपना स्कोर इन मेंस 2023। इसके अंदर आपको प्रोवाइड किए जाएंगे लाइव लेक्चर्स थ्रू अ फास्ट कवरेज ऑफ सिलेबस इन क्वेश्चन आंसर फॉर्मेट। साथ ही में वैल्यू एडेड मटेरियल भी होगा ऑफ एंटायर पेपर 1 एंड पेपर 2। एंड में आपको चीट शीट्स भी अवेलेबल कराई जाएंगी। साथ ही में इसके अंदर इंक्लूड होंगी हमारी 12 टेस्ट सीरीज, जिसके अंदर 4 हाफ लेंथ टेस्ट हैं, 6 फुल लेंथ टेस्ट हैं एंड 2 स्पेशल डेडिकेटेड करंट इश्यूज बेस्ड टेस्ट भी हैं। Apart from this, you will also be provided with lectures and PDFs of PSIR's issues in news from January 2022 till 10 September 2023, ताकि आप dynamic events को भी जो है फटाफट कवर कर पाएं। Apart from this, आपके जो मेंस के टेस्ट आप लिखेंगे, डिटेल्ड evaluation इनकी प्रोवाइड की जाएगी with feedback which will be oriented towards ensuring your improvement। साथ ही में दिए जाएंगे मॉडल आंसर्स, वीडियो सॉल्यूशंस एंड लाइव सेशंस, ताकि आप भी बेहतर एनालाइज कर पाएं कि पेपर को अप्रोच कैसे करना है। साथ ही में देयर विल आल्सो बी मेंटरशिप बाय सिलेक्टेड ऑफिसर कैंडिडेट्स एंड टेलीग्राम सपोर्ट ग्रुप, जो कि आपके रेगुलर डाउट्स हो गए, कोई इश्यूज हो गए, उनके साथ डील करने के लिए भी बनाया गया है। तो हिस्सा बनिए SPG का एंड इंश्योर कीजिए that this means is the final means that gets you a rank in UPSC। कॉन्ट्रैक्चुअलिस्ट ट्रेडिशन का जो शुरुआत है वो किया गया हॉब्स द्वारा, जहां पे अब क्या हुआ दैट हॉब्स, अगेन अ मेजर क्रिटिसिज्म ऑफ हॉब्स जो कि निकल के आया था, दैट हॉब्स स्टार्ट्स एज एन इंडिविजुअलिस्ट। जो प्रिसाइज स्टार्टिंग पॉइंट ऑफ हॉब्स था इंडिविजुअलिज्म पे बेस्ड था, द आइडिया ऑफ ह्यूमन इक्वालिटी पे बेस्ड था, द आइडिया ऑफ एक्टिव क्रीचर पे बेस्ड था, द आइडिया ऑफ पॉलिटिकल अथॉरिटी डिराइविंग इट्स बैकिंग फ्रॉम द कंसेंट ऑफ द पीपल पे बेस्ड था। बट जो इवेंचुअल लॉजिकल कंक्लूजन निकल के आई विद द क्रिएशन ऑफ लेवियाथन, दैट मूव डाउन द रोड ऑफ अथॉरिटेरियनिज्म, ऑफ एब्सोल्यूटिज्म। Now a further correction is witnessed with the coming up of John Locke। ठीक है, अब जैसे कि हमने देखा था कि हॉब्स का कॉन्टेक्स्ट अलग था, जिस कॉन्टेक्स्ट के अंदर हॉब्स एमर्ज हुए थे वहां पे क्या था, वहां पे उनकी स्टेटमेंट ऑफ फियर एंड आई बीइंग बोर्न ट्विंस मीनिंगफुल निकल के आई। अब लॉक ने जिस तरह से अपनी थ्योरी बनाई, जिस तरह से कॉन्ट्रैक्टेरियन ट्रेडिशन को वो आगे लेके गए, अगेन दैट वाज डीपली एसोसिएटेड विद द काइंड ऑफ कॉन्टेक्स्ट जिसके अंदर वो इमर्ज हुए थे। तो जहां पे 1642 का ब्लडी रेवोल्यूशन विटनेस किया था हॉब्स ने, ऑन द अदर हैंड लॉक वाज प्रिवी टू द 1688 का ग्लोरियस रेवोल्यूशन And in the aftermath of the same, जब William and Mary came to power, you also saw 1689 के अंदर Bill of Rights being passed, which led to the establishment of constitutional monarchy in Britain. And furthermore, you also saw the passing of the Bill of Toleration, जहां पे a limited amount of freedom of religion जो है ग्रांट की गई. अभी भी this wasn't really extended to Catholics, but at least it was a step forward for Britain. ठीक है, तो अब because of these kind of changes, because of this almost peaceful change and transformation, and that is why it was called the Glorious Revolution, right? Because it was a very peaceful change which was witnessed. This really impacted Locke, and Locke का जो thought निकल के आया in his 2 treatises of government. Now very importantly हमें ये भी पता है कि इनकी जो 2 treatises है, इसके अंदर जो first treatise है which remains incomplete, ये first treatise जो है, this was actually a criticism of Filmer's Patriarcha, जो कि again contractualist जो tradition है उसके बहुत बड़े क्रिटिक थे जो रॉबर्ट फिल्मर थे. एंड इंस्टेड जो एक डिवाइन आइडिया ऑफ सॉवरेनिटी, द डिवाइन आइडिया ऑफ अथॉरिटी जो है, ये इसको सपोर्ट करते थे. Now it was against Filmer's Patriarcha that we see the coming up of John Locke's first treatise, जो incomplete रहती है, but it is the second treatise which is much more meaningful, जहां पे इन्होंने जो अपना इंटायर प्रिमाइस था कि किस तरह से मेरा कॉन्ट्रैक्चुअलिस्ट ट्रेडिशन आगे बढ़ेगा, व्हाट इज द काइंड ऑफ अथॉरिटी दैट आई एम क्रिएटिंग, व्हाट इज द काइंड ऑफ राइट्स दैट विल बी इंश्योर्ड टू द पीपल, all of that was talked of in the second treatise. Now very importantly, there are a number of changes that we witness in Locke's theory as compared to Hobbes' idea, है ना. तो अब हमें पता है जहां पे Hobbes का starting point was a very pessimistic view of human nature, in Locke we witness a much more balanced or positive view of human nature, right? However, the problem in state of nature still prevails. Now importantly, इस state of nature के अंदर भी लॉक ने 2 चीजों की बात की. Now you will remember that already the language of natural law जो है, इसको काफी ज्यादा पॉपुलराइज कर दिया था. हमने देखा है कि हॉब्स ने इसकी बात की है. इनफैक्ट इससे पहले ग्रोटियस एक्सेट्रा ने भी जो है इसकी बात करनी शुरू कर दी थी. Therefore Locke को जो है एक sort of फाउंडेशन मिल गई थी टू फर्दर इनकलकेट एंड ग्रो हिज आइडियाज. ना नेचुरल लॉ की जब हम बात करते हैं, नेचुरल लॉ जो है एक थोड़ा ड्यूटी बेस्ड मैकेनिज्म बताता है ना, क्योंकि नेचुरल लॉ में क्या लिखा गया है, सर्टेन लॉज लिखे गए हैं जो कि कहते हैं आपकी ड्यूटी होनी चाहिए इन्हें निभाना अगर आप एक बढ़िया जीवन व्यतीत करना चाहते हैं. अब हॉब्स ने ये पॉइंट आउट किया था कि भैया नेचुरल लॉ बातें बहुत अच्छी कर रहा है, right? The things that it is putting forward is very, very good, very meaningful, trying to ensure peace, and we completely understand that. But the problem remains, as the first statement had pointed out, that there is no authority backing the same, and that is why it becomes very difficult to implement it, to apply the same. Now, along with this idea of natural laws which impose duty on people to do something, and this duty can become meaningful only when it is backed by the force of a sovereign, there also exists one more thing which is derived of this natural law, and that is the idea of natural rights. Now, importantly for Hobbes, एक ही natural right was the all important one, which was right to self preservation, which was your right to life. And that is why, even though there was no right to revolt, the only area where people could stand up against the sovereign was in case that this right to life or right to self preservation जो है was violated. Now for Locke, we see that natural rights actually emerges as a much more extensive theory, and this natural rights का जो idea है consists of three main natural rights, which is right to life, liberty and property. In fact, in context of this statement only, we will realize that this right to property possibly was one of the most important ideas which was put forward by John Locke, because this right to property was not defined narrowly in the sense of meaning material possessions only, right? This was in fact defined very, very extensively, and for certain scholars, this right to property also could include the right to life as well as right to liberty, right? This was a broad understanding of John Locke's right to property. Now, even though there is a slightly more balanced view of human nature, state of nature still emerges very problematic. Why? Because there are three main problems. What are those problems? The same problems that we witness even today. First, what is the law? है ना? अब मैंने अगर फॉलो करना है या मैंने सम फॉर्म ऑफ लॉ एंड ऑर्डर मेंटेन करना है, आई शुड फर्स्ट बी अवेयर that what are certain rules that I'm not supposed to break, right? So first, there was no clarity on what is law. Secondly, and very importantly, there was nobody to execute this law. And most importantly, there was missing an impartial arbitrator who can actually end up adjudicating disputes that would arise due to misunderstandings or certain conflicts or certain issues amongst the individuals, right? And because of this reason, John Locke felt the need that people had to leave behind the state of nature to move towards a state, towards moving towards a political authority that is able to offer all of these things which are missing in the state of nature. Now again, one more thing that I'm sure all of you will be aware of, that unlike Hobbes's single contract, for John Locke we have a two-stage contract, right? In the first stage, what is created is a civil or political society, and in the second stage, what is created is a political अथॉरिटी. ठीक है, ये जो है आपका टू स्टेजेस ऑफ अ कॉन्ट्रैक्ट हो जाता है. नाउ लेट्स ड्रॉ अनदर कंपैरिजन विद हॉब्स. नाउ व्हेन वी लुक एट हॉब्स, राइट, हॉब्स सेज दैट when humans are looked at as a certain species, you will see that there are numerous things that humans have similar as animals. In fact, the basic four faculties जो हैं, जो एनिमल्स के पास उपलब्ध है, वही हमारे पास उपलब्ध है. देखने की, सुनने की, खाने की, ये सारी चीजें जो है सिमिलर हैं. However, there is a fifth faculty that only humans have that animals don't possess. And ये चीज, this thing is something which is common to Hobbes as well as to the Greek thinkers, particularly Aristotle. Now, Aristotle also had focused a lot on the option, on the ability of speech. स्पीच इतनी जरूरी क्यों है? हॉब्स भी यही बोलते हैं. हॉब्स कहते हैं स्पीच अलाउज यू टू कन्वर्ट योर प्राइवेट रीजन इनटू पब्लिक रीजन. In fact, how does contract become possible? People who are fighting with one another, according to Hobbes, in state of nature, how were they able to come to an agreement and be able to draw up a contract? Because better reason prevailed privately, individually. अब better reason to prevail हो गया, but मुझे जाके दूसरों को भी तो बताना पड़ेगा that देखो मूर्खों, you know, we like idiots have been fighting with one another and actually making our lives miserable. A better thing to do is that we actually all come together, try to draw up a contract and make a political authority so that our lives can be better. So this ability to convert private reason to public reason is made possible. How? It is made possible via speech, right? So speech is very, very important. Now Hobbes के लिए social, right? Remember, Aristotle says that humans are social in nature. By their very nature only we are social. Hobbes के लिए this was not true, right? Social होना was a means to an end. That society में हमें रहना पड़ेगा. Why? Because the survival of a person alone is next to impossible, right? It is impossible for a person to survive on their own. So therefore, to be social is actually a need and not really our nature. So it is a means to an end, not really an end in themselves. On the other hand, अब जब हम जॉन लॉक को देखते हैं, राइट, जॉन लॉक जो है यहाँ पे थोड़ा डिफरेंशिएट करते हैं. व्हाई? बिकॉज देयर इज अ मोर बैलेंस्ड ओपिनियन ऑफ ह्यूमन नेचर, वेर इन सिविल एंड पॉलिटिकल सोसाइटी इज वेरी पॉसिबल, इज रिक्वायर्ड एज द फर्स्ट स्टेज ऑफ कॉन्ट्रैक्ट, actually working upon those social natures of men and women. And finally, when the political society is constituted, then these people come together to formulate a political authority which will make possible making of the law, executing the law, and adjudicating any disputes that arise out of the application of this law. And this is also the reason why right to revolt becomes possible for John Locke, because पहली चीज तो the peaceful transformation that he had seen during the 1688 glorious revolution, and secondly and more importantly, because revolting and removing a political authority did not result in going back to the state of nature, but in fact resulted them to going to the initial stage, which is still the civil and political society, and then these people can again elect a new authority which will then become the sovereign, right? So this idea was included in John Locke. Now this is a larger idea with respect to the theory of John Locke. What is the question now? Now we have seen that one of the most important premises of John Locke's theory was the advent of the idea of natural rights. Now they say that John Locke's theory is one of capitalist appropriation and the dictatorship of bourgeois, right? Now how do we come to this? पहली चीज तो ये जो पूरी स्टेटमेंट है ना, सीबी मैकफर्सन ने बहुत ज्यादा क्रिटिसाइज किया था जॉन लॉक को. इन्होंने बोला था कि ये पोजेसिव इंडिविजुअलिज्म को प्रैक्टिस करते हैं, ये कैपिटलिस्ट अप्रोप्रिएशन को जो है प्रमोट कर रहे हैं, राइट? ये सारी चीजें जो है इनके अगेंस्ट लेबल की गई थी, राइट? नाउ इंपॉर्टेंट क्या है कि ये लेबल्स, हाउ डू यू मेक सेंस ऑफ देम? यू कैन मेक सेंस ऑफ देम थ्रू द फैक्ट दैट जॉन लॉक had actually been a huge supporter of right to property, and importantly इसके क्या impact था in society जिसके कारण इनको बुलाया गया है as someone who was supporting capitalist appropriation and dictatorship of bourgeois. Right now, how will we actually approach this statement and write the answer? The first thing that one needs to do is actually introduce Locke's role as the founder of modern liberalism. So modern day liberalism, Nozick ने in fact देखा है जॉन लॉक को as being the harbinger of neoliberalism. The emphasis on property, the emphasis on rights, the emphasis on trying to control the interference of the government and the ability of government to be able to intrude in the right to property were all seen by Nozick as support of John Locke to neoliberalism. And how this idea of new liberalism, this classical liberalism जिसकी foundation जो है ले की लॉक ने, led to the coming up of theories of rights, including enshrining of the right to property. Now in the body part, we have to mention that what is this right to property, right? What is it that Locke actually understood by right to property? Was it an unlimited right? If it wasn't an unlimited right, what sort of limitations were included by John Locke? Now, importantly, after covering this, we have to now go to the statement that why is it that he's been labeled as someone who is supporting capitalist appropriation and dictatorship of bourgeois. Now, this will only come ahead when we actually end up understanding that how the limitations on right to property provided by John Locke were meaningless and could be easily overcome by the modern transformations and innovations जो कि हम contemporary capitalism के अंदर देखते हैं. And because these hurdles created by John Locke were easily overcome, this could lead to a lot of concentration of wealth, thereby supporting capitalist appropriation. And because again जब हम dictatorship of bourgeois की बात कर रहे हैं, किसका नाम आपको लगता है आगे आना चाहिए, right? The very mention of the idea of dictatorship of bourgeois, right, that the state is being controlled by the capitalists, should invoke Marx. ठीक है, तो मार्क्स ने यही बोला कि जहां पे आप वेल्थ को कुछ हैंड्स में कॉन्सेंट्रेट कर रहे हैं, इवेंचुअली पॉलिटिकल पावर, राइट, मार्क्स का आइडिया क्या था, दैट इट इज द इकोनॉमिक पावर व्हिच इज एक्चुअली creating or molding the superstructure, and the political power was a part of the superstructure which was at the end of the day shaped by the economic base. And therefore, if Locke is providing for capitalist appropriation, this means at the level of the state, this is leading to the dictatorship of bourgeois. Right, now these are certain points that we have to develop in the answer, and then we conclude by putting in contemporary examples as well as offering a critical assessment of the kind of right to property जो कि जॉन लॉक ने ऑफर की थी, and किस तरह से contemporary era में भी ऐसे appropriation को रोकने की सख्त जरूरत है. Right, now let's quickly move on to the answer. Now, John Locke, जैसे कि हमने बात की 17th century के one of the most important contractualist thinkers हैं, who laid the foundation of classical liberalism by developing the concepts of natural rights, right to property, the idea very importantly of limited government, because unlike the absolute sovereign, the absolute government created in Hobbes's political thought, in Hobbes's Leviathan, John Locke की जो sovereignty निकल के आती है, this is limited. It is limited by the rights which are granted to the people. The reason why the government has been set up is to protect these natural rights. The reason why the government exists is to ensure that these rights can be easily availed and practiced by the citizens. And very importantly, if the government fails to provide the same, the citizens also had the right to revolt, to change the government if their demands, if their rights were not being protected adequately by the political authority consented to by them. Right? तो इसीलिए जो लॉक के आइडियाज है, जो आज के डे एंड एज में कैपिटलिज्म है, द लिबरल डेमोक्रेसी का जो आइडिया है, a lot of these were based on the ideas provided by John Locke in his theory. However, at the same time, while being the foundational thinker for liberal democracy, for new age capitalism, for classical liberalism, John Locke was also vehemently criticized by various scholars and thinkers for being a scholar who supported the development of capitalist appropriation as well as consolidation of power by the bourgeois or the capitalists. Now we have to prove that how do we see this happening. First is the first element that we see, which is capitalist appropriation, that how do we see this taking place in Locke's theory. Right, now as we mentioned beforehand only, even though natural rights में there's right to life, liberty and property mentioned, Tully in his analysis of John Locke actually talks of that किस तरह से property was seen as an umbrella term which included not just material possessions but also the wider premise of right to certain liberties, right to having your life, right to being able to practice your religion, etc. All of this was actually included in your right to property. Now, importantly, Locke claims, right? Locke ने पहले ही अपना safeguard जो है तैयार किया हुआ है, already अपनी protection जो है की हुई है. He says that listen, I am not offering you an unlimited right to property. That is not possible only because once you've entered the sphere of contract, once you've entered the sphere of a political authority, you cannot have any unlimited right. All rights are in fact backed by and ensured by law. So this is also something which is different from Hobbes. Hobbes ने क्या बोला था? Liberty is silence of law. वहीं पे जो हमारे लॉक है वो क्या बोलेंगे कि भैया liberty is actually backed by law. Right? आज के अगर हम again this is a contemporary comparison that you can draw on in the difference in which liberty is apprehended by Hobbes versus that of Locke, that if in the Indian Constitution today we look at the fundamental rights, है ना, फंडामेंटल राइट्स जो कि आपके चैप्टर 3 के अंदर आपको दिए गए हैं, राइट, आपके आर्टिकल 19 से लेके 32 तक आपको ये गारंटी किए गए हैं. नाउ दीज फंडामेंटल राइट्स आर एक्चुअली व्हाट? दे आर द बेसिस ऑफ ग्रांटिंग यू लिबर्टी, एंड दिस लिबर्टी इन इंडिया इज मीनिंगफुल. व्हाई? बिकॉज इट इज बैक्ड बाय लॉ, एंड इंपॉर्टेंटली इट इज बैक्ड बाय द फंडामेंटल लॉ ऑफ द लैंड which is your Indian Constitution, and importantly, post the Keshanand Bharti judgment, it has been interpreted that these liberties, these rights are a part of basic structure doctrine. ठीक है. So these liberties actually became meaningful, became important, became possible according to Locke because they were backed now by law, जिसको जो हमारी authority है, जो हमारा sovereign है, वो ensure करके रखता है. Now, in this right to property that was devised by Locke, he says there are certain limitations that exist so as to ensure that this is not misused by the people. There are three main limitations जिनकी बात जो है Locke करते हैं. First is the labor limitation. Now, he says even in the state of nature, property can come into existence because of this idea of labor, right? So now imagine that a hunter goes to hunt, right? Hunter गया, उन्होंने एक डियर देखा, डियर को उन्होंने कर दिया शूट. अब बेसिकली क्या हुआ, हंटर ने अपना जो लेबर था ऑफ हंटिंग वो मिक्स किया, राइट? उन्होंने वो गए, ट्रैप सेट किया, वेंट लुकिंग फॉर अ डियर, कैप्चर्ड अ डियर, किल्ड द डियर, फाइनली यूज्ड दिस मीट एंड केम. So this meat of the deer became property of whom? Became property of the hunter, because the hunter had mixed his labor into acquiring that property. And therefore this is the first limitation that is found in Locke's theory, that the amount, right, जितनी भी आप property acquire कर रहे हैं, it should be related closely to the labor that has been performed to acquire the same. Similarly, if a person say found certain seeds and thought maybe I should try growing these, right? So sowed those seeds, took care of them, gave them fertilizers, gave them manure, regular watering, so on so forth. The eventual property which comes out, very importantly, the kind of labor that he mixed with the land, that plot of land also becomes the person's land. Why? Because उन्होंने tilling किया उस land को, उस लैंड की जो है फर्टिलिटी बढ़ाने के लिए चीजें डाली, राइट? रेगुलरली पानी डाला, सो दैट लैंड वाज ट्रांसफॉर्म्ड फ्रॉम जस्ट समथिंग व्हिच वाज लाइंग फैलो टू समथिंग व्हिच वाज प्रोडक्टिव एंड फर्टाइल because of the kind of labor that was mixed by me with this inanimate object called land, right? So this was the first limitation which was imposed, that if I want to possess something, I have to ensure that an appropriate amount of labor has been put in by me. The second idea was the sufficiency limitation, right? Sufficiency limitation का क्या मतलब है? That whatever I seek to possess, the capacity, the capability, the amount of possession that I hold should not be इतना ज़्यादा that it ends up worsening the position of others, wherein there is not enough and good left for the rest of the people, right? So imagine that I live on an island, and close to where I was tilling is the only freshwater lake of that entire island. And I say that now I saw this lake first, so therefore I am going to possess it for drinking purpose, for watering my crops, for everything. I will just use all the water. I will not share it with anyone. Now what is the problem here? The sufficiency limitation. Why? Because if you end up controlling all the water, this means the position of others on that island is drastically worsened. They will have no water to drink, they will have no water to tend to their crops, to live their lives, and they will obviously end up eventually dying, right? So therefore this sufficiency limitation was also seen as very, very important. Last but not the least is the idea of spoilage limitation, right? Now I say that I will grow a lot of crops, and I keep growing them and putting them in my godown, and what happens is crops are perishable items. At the end of the day they will perish, right? So there will be no good derived of it. Why? Because in the long term, if I don't share them with others, they will end up being spoiled, they will end up getting rotten, and then what is the purpose of it at all? And therefore Locke said that you have to bear in mind all these three limitations in acquiring property, so that you ensure that none of these limitations are in any way violated, right? So this was the starting premise of Locke in trying to control or in trying to limit what is called the right to property. इनफैक्ट नॉजिक ने, नाउ पहली चीज, अब हम क्रिटिसिज्म भी ऑफर करेंगे कि हम बताएंगे कि किस तरह से कैपिटलिस्ट अप्रोप्रिएशन के साथ जो इनको एसोसिएट किया, बट वेरी इंपॉर्टेंटली द फैक्ट दैट कैपिटलिस्ट अप्रोप्रिएशन इज क्लोजली एसोसिएटेड टू व्हाट? न्यू लिबरलिज्म. एंड न्यू लिबरल थिंकर्स खुद ही बोल रहे हैं कि लॉक वाज आल्सो एक्चुअली अ न्यू लिबरल थिंकर. व्हाई? बिकॉज पहली चीज तो उन्होंने राइट टू प्रॉपर्टी दिया. सेकेंडली लॉक ने क्या बोला था कि देखिए अगर आपने टैक्स लगाना है ना, एक चीज लॉक ने बोली थी कि देखिए आपको जरूरत नहीं है कि यूनैनिमस अग्रीमेंट मिले, कि सबने, इफ देयर आर 100 पीपल लिविंग, 100 of them have to agree that you have to tax us. No, if 51 also agree, majority also agree, the government can tax them. Now this comes across as a very welfareist argument. Why taxation allow kar raha hai? But Nozick says that firstly, the first libertarian element that you find in Locke, the fact that the government cannot tax without the consent of the property owner, even if it's majority. Second, and very importantly, now the taxation cannot be as much as the government wants. Welfareism ke liye hum baha rahe hain paise, right? And therefore we will increase the level of taxes to as much as the state wants. No, the rate of taxation should only be so much that the government is able to successfully protect property rights. Because if I have to guarantee property rights, I have to ensure that there is police, that there are certain bureaucracies involved, that there is jails which are done, so that land rights जो है उनको protect किया जा सके. If someone is selling them or reselling them or transferring them, we need the bureaucracy, to the judiciary to take care of the same. In case there is any dispute, we need the judiciary to take care of the dispute. We need the police to actually enforce law and order so that nobody is able to snatch someone else's property, right? So to maintain all these facilities to protect property rights, you need some amount, the government needs some amount, and therefore taxes should only be so much that the government is able to create an infrastructure to protect property rights, not to indulge in a very wide welfareist agenda, what governments in today's premise in positive liberal or welfareist formats would want to do, right? So this was something Nozick says was not somewhat supported by John Locke. Now C.B. Macpherson aate hai as a massive critic of John Locke. He says all these limitations that Locke talks about, that look, my right to property is not unrestricted, so it's not leading to concentration of wealth, it is not leading to appropriation by the capitalist, it is not leading to power in the hands of bourgeois. He says all of this is just faff. It is meaningless. These limitations hold no ground whatsoever. In fact, ये limitations ही ऐसी बनाई गई हैं Locke द्वारा that they can be easily overcome. How do you overcome them? Now, this is also discussed by Macpherson. He says, let's look at the first limitation now, right? He says, let's start easy. Let's look at the spoilage limitation, right? That in the longer run, if you keep hoarding, right? This is exactly what happens if we look at the granaries of India, the godowns of India, where आपके PDS के लिए store की जाती है the crops acquired by the government, right? In case they aren't let out, this is the problem कि वो नीचे rot होने लगती है. So the government actually has to put them out in the market as well, right? Otherwise, they will end up getting spoiled in the longer term. Now, what does Macpherson say? He says, look at it at an individual level. Right now, with the movement towards modern civilization, I don't have to store products. I don't have to store perishable items. Right? What do I now have? I have money. And I can store money how much ever I want. In fact, so much so कि पहले तो चलो होता था नोट पुराने हो गए, right? If we store gaddies and gaddies of notes of currency, there is a possibility that that paper note will weather away. Now, so that is also not a problem. Why? You have the modern banking system. I can invest them in my banking account. Now, very importantly, एक और spoilage का element जो हम देख सकते हैं कि say even if money is not rotting, but sitting money is losing value. Now, that is also been overcome. I can put it simply. If I am very risk averse also, I can just put it in my saving account or I can put it in a fixed deposit and it will earn me some interest on top of that. I can put it in shares. I can put it wherever. So, this spoilage limitation is easily overcome. The second very important idea, the issue was of sufficiency restriction. That whatever I have or possess, I should leave so much that there is enough and good for others so that their lives aren't ruined, so that they are able to lead good lives as well, right? Now, here also the limitation is easily overcome. Now, he says that if you imagine, right, that all the land which could be possessed has now been possessed by the capitalists, right? So, whatever the means of production that existed, those means of production are now controlled by the capitalists. Now, this modern form of capitalism, what has it developed? It has come up with wage labor, right? In fact, usse pehle bhi, when we imagine feudalism also, what existed? You had some form of wage labor. Then it's okay if you didn't have land. So what? You don't have land, no problem. What do? You come seek employment with me. You work on my land, you do my tilling, you do my sowing, you do whatever you want, and then in return for that, I will either pay you wages or I will give you some element of whatever is produced. So this means you aren't dying, you still have enough and good to lead a normal life, a good enough life, right? Maybe not as nice as capitalists or feudal lords, but it's okay, right? John Locke didn't say that you have to all live luxurious lives. You should just have enough so that you can carry on living, and via wages I am able to help you give whatever is necessary for leading your life. So again, जो sufficiency वाली limitation थी, that is also overcome. Then last but not the least, the labor limitation. He says ये तो actual में exist ही नहीं करती थी, because in the very state of nature, Locke had mentioned that if I am not doing the labor, say if I use machines to do my labor, या फिर instead of my machines I use a servant to do my labor, servant को I am paying some wages. So whatever labor that servant performs, the serf performs, my labor performs, whatever the produce is becomes mine, because the labor of my servant cannot be separated from my labor. So whatever labor that servant is doing is technically my labor only, because I am paying that person in lieu of the labor that that person is performing. Therefore, the labor limitation actual mein, C.B. Macpherson argues, never had existed as far as Locke's thought was concerned. Now, because of this appropriation of wealth, extraction of surplus, Karl Marx ended up criticizing Locke also, that because he has helped in capitalist exploitation and appropriation and concentration of wealth amongst the capitalists, what happens is that because they possess the means of production, because they control the means of production, at the end of the day, the state, the political power also comes to be controlled by the bourgeois. And that is why by supporting capitalist appropriation at the economic level, at the level of the state, at the level of the politics, Locke inadvertently ends up supporting also the dictatorship of bourgeois. In fact, Rousseau himself, like जब हम रूसो को पढ़ते हैं, हम यही बात करते हैं, कहते हैं रूसो का स्टार्टिंग पॉइंट क्या था, दैट मैन क्या होता था, नोबल सैवेज होता था. मैन का फॉल कब होता है, व्हेन ही डिस्कवर्स दिस इंस्टीट्यूशन ऑफ प्राइवेट प्रॉपर्टी. This institution of private property leads to inequality, it leads to social divisions, it leads to corruption of this noble savage. And that is why Locke, because Locke had espoused property ownership, the idea of private wealth, the idea of accumulation of wealth in the hands of few, this inadvertently leads to exploitation of masses by the capitalist minority, right? So this is the reason why John Locke was criticized as someone who was supporting capitalist appropriation along with dictatorship of bourgeois. However, again यहाँ पे हम argue कर सकते हैं that John Locke की ये जितने भी criticism हैं, these have also emerged because there have been diverse interpretations in the way in which he imagined limitations and the extent to which the right to property could be enjoyed by the people living in his state under a particular political authority. However, at the same time, while noting certain weaknesses in his thought, it is also important to underline certain very fruitful circumstances, certain very fruitful concepts that John Locke actually gave birth to. Be it the idea of rights, be it the idea of a constitutional limited government, be it the idea of rule of law, that now instead of arbitrariness, there will be rule of law which will be equally applicable on one and all. It has to be abided by, and it is subject, not just the masses are subject to this rule of law, but it will also be applicable to the wider political power existing as well, so that arbitrariness can be minimized and law can be applied uniformly on one and all. In fact, it is because of these ideas that modern democracies became possible today. So one cannot disassociate Locke from claiming that credit, right? So try कि even after you offer a criticism or the idea of why Locke was associated with these issues, try to end it on a more positive format, try to end it on a positive note, so that we also understand that even if Locke did something wrong or there were certain elements of weaknesses in his theory, there were also a number of positive elements, which is why we are studying Locke today, which is why Locke ends up being relevant even today.